Seva Deshenim Vera'ananim Yihu Lehagi Ki Yashar Adonai Tzuri Velo Avlatabo. At this time, I invite you to greet your neighbors, folks you know, folks you don't know, and say a Shabbat Shalom.
Sounds good.
Shabbat Shalom again, everyone. We now turn to page 26 for Chatzi Kaddish. Please remain standing as we turn towards our ark. Yitkada v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah
Amen.
Be'amad yivrach yeruteh v'yamlich malchuteh B'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayedecho Beit Yisrael Bagala u'v'isman kariv v'meru Amen Yehi Shmei Rabbah mevorach Le'alam u'ame'amaya Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yipar v'tramam v'yanaseh v'yitharar v'yitale v'yitalal Shmei Kedusha B'richu Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata Tushbechata v'nechemata Ta'amiran be'alma v'meru Amen Yai dai dai Yai dai 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 Yai dai 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 Yai dai dai Yai dai 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 Yai dai 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 Yai dai 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 Yai dai 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 Yai dai 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 Barechu et Adonai HaMevorach Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam va'ed Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam va'ed Yai dai dai Yai dai 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 Yai dai 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 dai. We turn to the top of your handout, page 1 of your daf, for some Hebrew and English together to honor the coming of the evening. Roll into dark, roll into light, night becomes day, day turns to night. Roll into dark, roll into light, night becomes day, day turns to night. Borei Yom v'layla, golel or mipnei choshech, golel or mipnei choshech, v'choshech mipnei or. Roll into dark, roll into light, night Night becomes day. Day turns to night. Yom v'layla. Golel or mipnei choshet. Golel or mipnei choshet. V'choshech mipnei or.
Day turns to night.
Roll into dark. Roll into light. Night becomes day. Day turns to night. Roll into dark. Roll into light. Night becomes day. Day turns to night. Baruch atah Adonai, Ha'ma'ariv Aravi.
Page 33 at the top. As you taught Torah to those whose names I bear, teach me Torah too. Its mystery beckons, yet I struggle with its truth. You meant Torah for me. Did you mean the struggle for me too? Don't let me struggle alone. Help me to understand, to be wise, to listen, to know. Lead me into the mystery.
Baruch atah Adonai, ohev amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. You may be seated. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'veitecha uv'lechtecha v'derech uv'shochbecha uv'kumecha וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני Adonai Elohechem, asher hotzeiti echem me'eretz Mitzrayim, liot lachem le'Elohim. Ani Adonai Elohechem, Adonai Elohechem, emet.
Crossing by Jericho Brown. The water is one thing and one thing for miles. The water is one thing, making this bridge built over the water another. Walk it early, walk it back when the day goes dim, everyone rising just to find a way toward rest again. We work, start on one side of the day like a planet's only sun, our eyes straight until the flame sinks. The flame sinks. Thank God I'm different. I've figured and counted. I'm not crossing to cross back. I'm set on something vast. It reaches long as the sea. I'm more than a conqueror, bigger than bravery. I don't march. I'm the one who leaps.
Page 40. מלכותך ראו בניך, בוקי הים לפני משה ומרים. זה אלינו ואמרו, זה אלינו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. Shelter us in place, shelter us in peace, shelter us in love, shelter us in love, shelter us in place, shelter us in peace, shelter us in love, shelter us in love. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu, Hashkivenu l'shalom, Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu, Hashkivenu l'shalom. Shelter us in place, shelter us in peace, shelter us in love, shelter us in love, shelter us in place, shelter us in peace, shelter us in love, shelter us in love. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu, Hashkivenu l'shalom, Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu, Hashkivenu l'shalom. Back to page 44. V'shameru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat, dorotam b'ritolam. V'shameru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל, אותי לעולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, וביום השביעי שבת וינפש. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם ושמרו ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. We rise and turn to page 46 for the Amidah. Adonai sifatai tiftach ufi agit tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, ve'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'konei Hakol, V'zocher Chasdei Avot v'Imahot, Umevi Geula Livnei V'neihem, Lema'an Shemo be'ahava, Melech Ozer u'Moshia u'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham ve'Ezrat Sarah, Atah Gibor le'olam Adonai, Mechayeh hakol atah Rav le'Hoshia, Mashiv haruach u'morid hagashem, Mechalkel chaim bechesed, Mechayeh hakol berachamim rabim, Somech noflim verofeh cholim, Umatir asurim, Umekayem emunato, Lishenei afar, Michamocha ba'al givurot, Umido melach, melech memit umechayeh, umatmiach Yeshua, v'ne'eman atah l'chayot hakol, Baruch atah Adonai, mechayeh hakol. Atah kadosh v'shimcha kadosh, u'kadoshim b'chol yom yehallelu selah. Baruch atah Adonai, ha'el hakadosh. You may be seated. Making Peace by Denise Levertov. A voice from the dark called out, the poets must give us imagination of peace, to oust the intense, familiar imagination of disaster. Peace, not only the absence of war, but peace, like a poem, is not there ahead of itself, can't be imagined before it is made, can't be known except in the words of its making, grammar of justice, syntax of mutual aid. A feeling towards it, dimly sensing a rhythm, is all we have until we begin to utter its metaphors, learning them as we speak. A line of peace might appear if we restructured the sentence of our lives, our making, revoked its reaffirmation of profit and power, questioned our needs, allowed long pauses. A cadence of peace might balance its weight on that different fulcrum. Peace, a presence, an energy field, more intense than war, might pulse then, stanza by stanza, into the world. Each act of living, one of its words, each word a vibration of light, facets of the forming crystal. As we think about
peace and care for the people we are in our hearts, both in our country and in Israel. I invite you to turn to the bottom of page 1 of your daf, where we have a prayer for our country that we will read aloud together. O guardian of life and liberty, may our nation, our community, and all of those who reside within it merit your protection and love. May our homes, our places of worship, our schools, our places of work be safe havens for growth of our minds, bodies, and souls. God of the scared, vulnerable, and compassionate, Holy One of the hopefuls, the pessimists, the optimists, merciful One of us all, infuse us with the strength to be righteous, tzedek, justice-seeking members of our community and nation. Bless our community and nation with safety and peace. And let us say, Amen. We turn the page on our daf, our handout, to words of peace, a great peace, Shalom Rav. Make of us a house for all people, gather us in hope for all people, surround us in peace for all people, in wholeness and in love. Make of us a house for all people, gather us in hope for all people, surround us in peace for all people, in wholeness and in love. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Ki atahu melech Adon lechol hashalom. Ki atahu melech Adon lechol hashalom. Lechol hashalom. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. V'tov be'einecha levarech et Amcha Yisrael bechol eit uvechol shah bishlomecha, bishlomecha. Make of us a house for all people, gather us in hope for all people, surround us in peace for all people, in wholeness and in love. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam. We invite you to take a moment of prayer for yourselves using the words either in our prayer book around the 60s in the page numbers, or the words that are on your heart this evening. turn to page 2 of our handout, our DOF. At the bottom of the page, it's another prayer for peace, but one that acknowledges that what each of us needs may look something different for each person in this room, depending on the world that we live in. Today is known as the Trans Day of Visibility. As a trans person myself, hi, visible today. Is a particular issue that our country is facing, is understanding the humanity and the visibility of my community. In the same way that many communities in our country, in the land of Israel, are suffering to be seen in this particular time. So we can use the power of our community to recognize the diversity within it, and hopefully pray and make some change in this world so that we can all have our own shelters of peace. This particular setting is a partnership between two non-binary clergy, Rabbi Ariel Tovlev and Cantor Zevi Tovlev, in response to this moment. There is no shelter of peace large enough to hold us all. There is no single canopy under which we all can fall. Each of us has a dream. Each of us has our pain. Though we all seek relief, our storms are not the same. Create a shelter just for me, to shield me from my woes. I know you too have your own, an ache that only God knows. There is no one solution, though we'd love just one fix. We must all come together to include what we might miss. Create a shelter just for me, to shield me from my woes. I know you too have your own, an ache that only God knows. When we weave together your canopy with mine, we can weather any storm. I know we'll be just fine. Create a shelter just for me, to shield me from my woes. I know you too have your own, an ache that only God knows. Create a shelter just for me, to shield me from my woes. I know you too have your own, an ache that only God knows, an ache that only God knows, an ache that only God knows. At this time, we turn to our prayer for healing. Mishaberach can be found on page 253 in our prayer books. And if you are thinking of someone at this time in need of healing, I invite you to share their name with our community as my head and eyes pass through the room. Thank you. keep these names in our heart along with the ones on our screen and those who may not have anyone to pray for them as we sing these words together. Again, page 253. Mi sheberach avotenu mekor habracha leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mi sheberach imotenu mekor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shelema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
Are these waters good to take? Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I'm Rabbi Leah Berkowitz, and I am really delighted to be here this Shabbat with you. Shabbat and beyond, I'll be here the whole weekend. I'm honored to share the pulpit of my friend and colleague, Adina Blum, and I'm especially grateful to Cantor Jordan Goldstein and Ann Berman Waldorf for helping to craft a vision for this weekend and then working with me to make it a reality. It is truly a pleasure to be here and to learn with you. So while I'm doing a variety of things here this weekend, this Shabbat and on Sunday at religious school, they're all connected by a single thread. Our people's sacred story, or more accurately, our sacred stories, plural. The big questions that inform my work are, what are the stories we tell, and how do we tell them? Why do they matter? What makes a story stick with us for generations, and whose stories still aren't getting told? Much of what we'll explore together falls under the category of midrash, from the Hebrew word meaning to explore or examine. Midrash refers to the process of creatively interpreting biblical stories, as well as any work of art or literature that results from that process. Midrash are stories about stories in the Bible, or in modern parlance, biblical fan fiction. Midrash is a way to breathe new life into what the film industry calls existing IP, or intellectual property. Like a Star Wars prequel or a Jane Austen adaptation, Midrash allows us to spend more time in the universes of the stories that we love, the stories that challenge and delight us. And Midrash makes sure that the story stays relevant to each ensuing generation. Engaging with the Midrashic process reminds us that these stories belong to us, and they don't have to stay frozen in the time and the place where they were written. So this brings me to how I got interested in creative Midrash. As with most great ideas, it started with a frustrated bat mitzvah student. I don't know if we know any of those. One morning after religious school tefillah, this student asked me, why do we even bother to mention Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah in our prayers? They didn't even do anything. Since I'd written my rabbinical thesis on some biblical women who I thought did quite a lot, I was eager to dispel my student of this notion. I searched and searched for age-appropriate books about the biblical women that I admired, so that I could share them with the young people in my congregation. And when I couldn't find exactly what I was looking for, I realized I'd have to write it myself, which is exactly what I did. A side note, that conversation took place in 2009, by the time this book of Midrash, maybe it happened this way, was published in 2022, this bat mitzvah student was in medical school, and she is now a resident in internal medicine. But I sent her a copy anyway, and she said she appreciated it. This conversation and many others made me think about whose stories still aren't getting told, and which stories need to be told in a new way for the new generation. In the children's book world, we often talk about the need for mirrors and windows. Mirrors so that children can see characters like themselves in the story and develop pride in who they are. And windows so that they can see characters who are not like them and develop empathy and compassion for others. And so I'm going to ask you a question. When was the first time that you saw a character who was like yourself in a book or on screen? And how did that feel for you? Take a moment to think about it, and then if anybody wants to share. The first time you saw a character like yourself in a book or on screen. Yes? Okay. Yes. So a book about... Yes. Yes. So do you remember what book it was? I'd be the girl next door except for one thing. I've never heard of that one, so that's good to know. In the back. Okay. So those feelings. Yes. So Anakin Skywalker and the many struggles that he has had. And then we've got one over there. Oh. Yes, A Wrinkle in Time. I think for a lot of young girls that really resonated. Yeah, wonderful. And so I'll follow that up with a question of what are some of the stories that gave you a window into somebody else's experience? Was there ever a time that you saw something in a book or on screen, it's like, oh, I never thought of it that way before. I think I understand somebody in that situation better, even though I've never been in it. Reading James Baldwin, I didn't hear where that came from. Oh, right there. So reading James Baldwin, yes. Yes, wonderful for the experience of people of color, and he's a brilliant writer. So, yes. Anyone else? All right, so we have some good examples of our mirrors and windows. So in my writing, I wanted to lift up the stories of lesser-known biblical characters, particularly women who were not the matriarchs, so that they could be seen more clearly than they are in the original text. But I also wanted to make sure that readers could see themselves in these less frequently told stories, and also to see others and empathize with them. When I first told the story that would become my very first picture book, The World Needs Beautiful Things, my goal was to elevate a lesser-known biblical character, Bezalel, the artisan who designed the Mishkan, the tent of meeting, and who features prominently in this week's Torah portion. I imagined him as a child, drawn to and maybe even sometimes distracted by the beautiful things in the wilderness. After I shared an early draft of the story with my community, a teacher in our religious school remarked, "Hey, that story was about me." While it hadn't been my intention, this teacher and several readers since have told me that they related to this version of Bezalel as someone who is neurodivergent, engaging with the world differently than those around him. Seeing ourselves in the story matters, and for my next book, I made my characters diverse on purpose. When I wrote my most famous work, Queen Vashti's Comfy Pants, I asked the illustrator to depict diverse skin tones and body types, and to include at least one character using a wheelchair. In my most recent book, The Moving Box Sukkah, I got a shout out on the Jewish Single Moms by Choice Facebook page because it's about a boy and his mother with no mention of a second parent. This is what we call incidental representation, when a particular identity is represented, but is not central to the plot of the story. It is not made out to be a big deal. It just is, which is another important way of being seen as simply a part of the fabric of everyday life. At best, storytelling can teach us empathy and compassion. That's why it's so important that readers of all ages have access to stories that portray the experiences of people from all different backgrounds and different situations, whether those books and stories are in their homes, their schools, or their public libraries. When my co-author Erica Wubsanaker and I began to work on our book of middle grade Midrash, we did so with our own students in mind. Erica is a beloved Hebrew school teacher in the Chicagoland area, but she is also a West Orange native, so a Jersey girl. We wanted our students to be able to read stories about biblical heroes with the same fervor that they read Percy Jackson or Harry Potter. But we also wanted our students to see themselves in the sacred story, to take ownership of the stories in the Bible, and to be empowered to write their own stories as well. Taking a creative approach to the story isn't just for kids. For one thing, I've never met anyone of any age that doesn't like to be told a story. I think that's why podcasts are so popular. We might think of storytelling as the fluffy part of our tradition, but Rabbi Aviva Richman of the Hadar Institute reminds us there is no law without story. Even as our sacred texts give us clear-cut commandments on how we live our lives, we also see often on the very same page stories that show us the nuances and the shades of gray. For example, when we write a Torah scroll, every precaution is taken to make sure that this scroll is exactly the same as the ones that came before it. If one letter is missing, or if any letters are added, it is not fit for use in the synagogue, and that's the law. We read in Deuteronomy, "You shall not add anything to what I command you or take anything away from it, but keep the commandments of your eternal God that I enjoin upon you." So that may be how we write a Torah scroll, but that's not how we read the Torah. When we read the Torah, we do so with the knowledge that each person is going to read it differently from any reader that came before them and any reader that comes after them. That's why the Divrei Torah our B'nai Mitzvah give are so interesting. They have the opportunity to add something new to the stories that we've been telling for millennia. We all notice different things. We're going to ask different questions, or we might have different answers to the questions that have been asked for generations. So how do the rabbis reconcile these two ideas, that our sacred stories can be fixed and fluid at the same time? They solve the problem with a story, of course. When you look inside a Torah scroll, and if you've never done so, I highly recommend it, you'll see that some of the letters have decorative crowns on them. There are strict rules about this. The crowns only appear on the letters Gimel, Zayin, Tet, Nun, Ayin, and Shin. And they have to appear on those letters each and every time they see them. It must be very tedious for the sofer or the soferet, the person who writes the Torah scroll, but it's also a place where they can be creative. The crowns might look different depending on who is drawing them, which sometimes helps us identify the time and place where a particular scroll was written. At first blush, the crowns would appear to be simply decorative. But since the ancient rabbis believed that nothing in the Torah was superfluous, they imagined that the crowns had to be there for a reason. So they tell a story in the Talmud in which God tells Moses, who is understandably stumped about why he has to make all these tiny little crowns, that one day a scholar will come along who can spin new interpretations and legal rulings just from the crowns on the letters. God even gives Moses the opportunity to time travel and see Rabbi Akiva's brilliance for himself. This is how Erica and I imagine it playing out in our version of the Talmudic tale. I'm just going to read a little bit from our story. God told Moses to close his eyes and turn around. Moses obeyed, feeling the air around him grow wavy and thick, as if he were swimming underwater. When he opened his eyes, the mountain beneath Moses' feet had vanished. Suddenly, he stood in the back of a classroom where a group of young people were bent over their books. "Where are we?" Moses whispered, not believing his eyes. "When are we?" "Jerusalem," God answered, "more than 1,000 years from now. The teacher's name is Akiva." Moses faced Akiva and tried to listen. The room buzzed with questions, flying in every direction like a swarm of bees. Sometimes Akiva would explain a law or a custom that Moses had never heard of. Other times, Akiva would respond to a question with another question, and the buzzing would start all over again. Moses recognized a word here and there: God, Shabbat, Torah, Israel. He heard Akiva say, "Love your neighbor as yourself," and that made him smile. But there was a lot he didn't understand. He felt as if he were swimming through that thick, wavy air again. "What does all of this mean?" Moses wondered aloud. The students all swiveled in their chairs to look at Moses. He hadn't realized that they could hear him or see him. "Did you have a question?" Akiva asked. "We love questions." "I can see that," Moses said. "But where did all of these questions come from?" "Oh, that's an easy one," said Akiva. "They came from our teacher Moses, who wrote down God's Torah on Mount Sinai. We found them in the crowns on the letters." Moses could practically hear God saying, "See, I told you." "So you and your students must know everything there is to know then, right?" "Not quite," Akiva laughed and shook his head. "I don't know why the aleph in the word Vayikra is little, or why the dalet in the word Echad is big. I don't know whether all life on earth was really created in 6 days, or whether it evolved over 1,000,000 years. And I don't know what the world will look like 2,000 years from now, and what questions students will be asking then." Moses had a question of his own. "God, will people really still be reading the Torah and asking new questions 2,000 years from now?" "Absolutely," God replied. "In every generation, there will be new students reading the laws and stories of the Torah and seeing what they can learn from them. The world they live in will look completely different from the world each of you lives in. They will have some of the same questions that you have now, and new ones too. Like you, they'll follow my teaching and traditions and pass them on. Like you, they'll create their own customs and pass on their own ideas as well. And like you, they'll ask the most important question: how can we make the world better?" Akiva and Moses looked at each other. God guessed their question, even though they hadn't asked it out loud. "Close your eyes and turn around," God said. Moses and Akiva closed their eyes and turned around. The air felt wavy and thick. When they opened their eyes, they were right here in this room, waiting to meet you, the next link in the never-ending chain of our people. They were waiting to hear the questions you will ask, the answers you will discover, and the stories you have to tell. I look forward to continuing our learning and storytelling together over the course of this weekend. Thank you for having me, and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi, for your words of wisdom and story.
Thank you.
We continue our own story with Aleinu. It is upon us on page 287 with the Hebrew at the top of the page. I invite you to rise as you are able. Would you help me with the ark door? Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסר הארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינת עוזו בגבהי מרומים, הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים, לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. 287. ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד, ושמו echad. You may be seated. Now we have some time for announcements. Oh, no, never mind. Oh, I'm not quite there yet. I'm sorry. Cantor's not used to the rabbi thing just yet. This time we turn to memory and those who are no longer with us in this place. I will read aloud the names of those we're thinking of, and if it is a name that is connected to you, I invite you to rise in their memory. In the first 7 days in Shiva, we remember Lois Popkin, wife of Bob Popkin. In Shloshim, we remember Beverly Lewis, Eileen Panzer, Kevin Slatnick, Serena Scher, and Charles Levine. And we continue to remember Burton Becker, former father-in-law of Cindy Becker. The yard sites that we remember this evening: Maurice Berman, Martin Bizanov, Harold Bloomberg, Beatrice Ruth Bloomberg, Estelle Bogad, Joseph Serkis, Claire Derman, Sylvia Dilberg, Bruce Edelman, Edward Ettman, Al Farber, Carol Glazer, Irving Gold, Elaine Goldstein, Anne Honoré, Alan Jakubowicz, Sidney Kalper, Lester Coleman, Louis Perlman, Edward Petsko, Esther Schneider, Michael Setzman, Emmanuel Sommer, Esther Strager, Arthur Veschleiser, Carl Weisenfeld, Aaron Wold, and Michael Zimmer. We turn to page 294. When we rise in body and spirit to recite these hallowed words. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabah be'alma divara chirote v'yamlich machute b'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael ba'agala uv'izman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shmei rabah mevarach le'olam u'almei almaya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei d'kudusha brichu le'ela minko birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiram be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'akol Yisrael v'imru amen. Usei shalom b'mramav hu ya'aseh shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru. Amen. You may be seated. And now for some announcements. Listen carefully because we have plenty of things coming up very soon.
Shabbat Shalom. It's been wonderful to be together tonight for our Shabbat service. Thank you to Rabbi Berkowitz for leading us tonight. We hope this opportunity to spiritually connect, learn, sing, and celebrate with your Beth Chaim community was meaningful for you. I am Ronnie Staffenberg. I'm here tonight representing the entire Temple Board. After our closing benediction, please follow the clergy and Aubrey to the rear of the sanctuary for Kiddush and Motzi. Join us for Torah study and bagels tomorrow morning at 8:45. Then at 10:30 a.m., Aubrey Richmond becomes Bat Mitzvah on the Beth Chaim Bima during our Saturday morning service. Mazal Tov to Aubrey and her family. Yay! On Sunday, religious school starts at 9, and our adult ed class, God and Theology, starts at 9:30. Our Judaica Shop Passover sale will be held in the lobby from 9 a.m. to noon. Join us again next Friday for Rock Shabbat. Rock Shabbat dinner is at 6:30. Reservations are required, followed by our Rock Shabbat service at 7:30. Next Saturday, April 5th, is our adult Shabbaton. Join us for a day of Shabbat learning and rest. Keep checking your Beth Chaim emails, our bulletin, and our website for information on all of our programs and more. Shabbat Shalom. I also want to to plead with everyone who identifies as Jewish, who is in the room, to please vote in the World Zionist Congress. We need everyone to vote, please, for the reform slate, if you so desire, which is line 3, we hope. I voted reform because it's time for women to be able to sit anywhere they want on a bus in Jerusalem, and that's just one reason. The monies that go from the diaspora Jews into Israel needs to, in my opinion, be spent for more liberal causes. I hope you'll join me. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you, Ronnie. Yes, indeed. It is an important cause, and you have until May 4th, so there's still plenty of time to vote for our causes and our voices to be heard in the land of Israel. To conclude, we can never have enough peace, so let's turn to page 62 if you'd like the words for Oseh Shalom. Yes, we are all on. Good. Oseh Shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, ve'imru, Amen. Yadadai, yadadai. Drama on the end there.
Didn't know if you were going to do it again. Yeah.
That's the fun of getting to lead with a new partner for the first time.
Yeah.
And to conclude our service together, I invite you to rise once more. And if you feel comfortable putting your arms around each other or including the people next to you, we finish with the priestly benediction to be able to send each other off in peace and goodness this evening. Yivarechecha Adonai ve'yishmerecha. May God bless you and keep you. Ya'er Adonai panav ve'elecha v'yechuneka. May God's light shine upon you, and may God be gracious to you. Yisa Adonai panav ve'elecha ve'yasem lecha Shalom. May you feel God's presence and peace and love within you always. And may we all find peace. Let us say,
Amen.